"Good morning, Dougal," said Florence. "Morning," said Dougal, tersely. "You're rather terse." "I feel terse. In fact, I've never felt terser." "Why, what's the matter?" said Florence. "Well, I was woken up this morning by some terrible jangling thing. I feel jangled. I'm never at my best when I'm jangled. I think it was a fire engine or something." "No, I don't think it was, Dougal," said Florence. That's it, screeched Dougal. "Definitely it." "An alarm clock," said Florence. "Alarm clock?" Dougal. "Sounds more like Big Ben gone mad." "Really? Now, what's it doing now? Huh?" The alarm clock was trying to speak. "What's it saying? "I'm not sure," said Florence. "Well, tell it to go and alarm someone else," said Dougal. "It's very pretty," said Florence. "Thanks very much," said the clock. "But what's the use of being pretty if you can't wake anyone up? "True," said Florence. "I'm a failure." "You woke me," said Dougal. "Oh, did I? Did I?" said the clock. "Yes, you did," said Dougal. "Oh, good," said the clock. "You see," said Florence. "Yes, good." "Good? Good? What's good about it?" said Dougal. "Now, Dougal, steady." "Steady? I'm exhausted, and I shall go and get some sleep." "Don't start that again. Do not start that again, or I shall lose my very considerable temper. All right? I thought I made myself clear. Now, Dougal. It's all right for you. You're human, but dogs need their sleep. Good night." "Now, don't worry about him," said Florence. "I'll find you someone else to wake up." "Try a snail." "Who?" they said. "A snail. Someone calling me. Someone calling me. Me. Someone calling me. Good morning, good morning. Everyone up bright and early?" "Oh, did I say something?" "You're always saying something, great oaf. You've hurt its feelings. Look, I just wanted to wake someone up," said the clock tearfully. "Well, we'd like to help," said Florence. "You speak for yourself," said Dougal. "Oh, I know. That rabbit." "You know someone who needs me?" said the clock. "I should say so," said Dougal. "Of course," said Florence. "That rabbit needs an alarm clock the size of a house. I should think you do very well." And Dougal went to have some refreshment with the excitement of it all. "Dougal?" Yes. "Now, where's that rabbit?" Florence called Zebedee. "I'm glad you called," said Zebedee, "because it's time for bed." "Hoist with my own petard," sighed Florence. "What?" said Dougal. And the clock tried to do what lots of people had tried to do before, and failed. "Whither away so fast?" said Brian. "Just practicing my speed trials," said the train. "Beep, beep." "I'm the fastest thing in the garden," she said. "Beep." "Care to have a race," said Brian, "against little old speedy me?" The train shook with laughter. "My dear," she said. But Brian was not put off. "A race," he said.
"All right," said the train, "I'll give you 3 miles start." "That's telling him, girl," said Francis. "When you're ready," said the train, giggling. "Just limbering up," said Brian. "So am I," said the train. "Ready?" Whoop. Dougal was looking for Brian. "I don't know. When you don't want them, snails are under your feet. But when you do want them, can't be found." "I hear your friend Brian is giving the train a race," said Ermintrude happily. "What?" said Dougal. "Racing a train? He's gone off his head." At last. Florence arrived. And Zebedee. "I hear there's a race going on," he said. "Care to go and see it?" "Oh, very much," said Florence. "It's between Brian and the train," said Zebedee. "Most unusual." Florence was delighted. "Spinning well, I see," said Zebedee. "Shall we go?" So they went. Dougal was organising things as usual, but Florence wanted to start the race. "Ready?" she said. And they were. So they went. "Care to take a bet?" said Dougal. "I should like the snail to win," said Ermintrude, "but then I'm a sentimental old thing." "He's 4 miles behind already," said Dougal. "Give him time." "Time? He'll need it." Florence picked some flowers for the winner. But the train ran out of steam. And so, finally, did Brian. Florence wondered where they'd got to. "Been arrested for speeding, I shouldn't wonder," said Dougal. "Poor pathetic little clump. I shouldn't have let him do it." Ermintrude said the contestants seemed to have given up. But it was very, very exciting while it lasted. "Yeah, about as exciting as the weather forecast," said Dougal. But Ermintrude insisted it had been exciting. Zebedee arrived. "Race over?" he asked. "Looks like it," said Dougal. "I'm thinking of entering them for the next Monte Carlo rally." "Well, better get to bed then," said Zebedee. "All right," said Florence. And she asked Dougal to give the flowers to Brian and the train. "Good night," she said. "I wish people wouldn't leave all the work to me," sighed Dougal. "How do I pick this lot up? Really? Feel such a fool." Mr. Rusty was worried about his chimney. It needed sweeping. He told Zebedee. "Sweep it then," said Zebedee. "Yes, well, easier said than done in this day and age," said Mr. Rusty. "You don't see a lot of chimney sweeps about for some reason, do you?" Zebedee went to have a look. You're right," he said, and Mr. Rusty had to laugh. "You look a proper caution," he said. "A proper caution?" And he laughed like a bucket. "Don't fall off," said Zebedee coldly, trying to be dignified. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Mr. Rusty. "It's just that you looked a proper caution," said Zebedee, slowly. "Exactly," said Mr. Rusty. And then they thought about the best way to get the chimney swept, without the sweeper being a proper caution. Florence met Dougal in the garden. "What have you got there?" she asked. "It's my patent chimney-sweeping device." "Oh, I see," said Florence, going for a little walk. "It's extremely clever and simple," said Dougal. "Bit like me, really." "What do you call it?" said Florence. "The hedgehog," said Dougal. "And what are you going to do with it?" "Sweep chimneys," said Dougal. "Oh, yes," said Florence. "What am I going to do with it, really?" muttered Dougal. "You're muttering, Dougal," said Florence. They arrived. "Now, where's that snail? I told him to be early. Never trust a mollusk." But Brian was on his way. "Here I am, old fat friend," he said. "Watch it," said Dougal, "and come on." Florence wondered how it was all going to work. "Won't work," said Brian. "Course it will," said Mr. McHenry. Florence started things off. "Now, who's going up?" she said. They all blenched, especially Dougal. "Well, someone's got to go," said Florence, but no one seemed very keen. "Shall I go?" she said. "Why not?" said Dougal. "Oh," said Florence, and thought about it. "Dogs climb ladders," said Mr. McHenry. "Go on, Dougal," said Florence. "No," said Dougal, so loudly they all jumped. "Oh, well," said Florence. "I think it's a job for a human being," said Brian. "It's a two-legged job, and I haven't even got one. It's a well-known fact. Snails are legless." Mr. McHenry finally volunteered, and went up on the roof with Dougal's chimney sweeper. "Careful." "Could someone go inside and tell me if anything's happening?" said Mr. McHenry. "Nothing startling as yet," said Brian, peering. Mr. McHenry worked away, to some effect. And then, unfortunately, he dropped the sweeper, with unfortunate results. Oh, was ever a snail so put upon?" And Brian went home in a snaily huff. What? Florence giggled when she shouldn't have. "What's going on?" said Zebedee. "I thought you were sweeping chimneys." And he went to investigate. "Good night," sighed Florence. "Did I do it right?" said Mr. McHenry. "Well, not quite," said Florence. Mr. Rusty was still worried about his chimneys. "I'm worried about my chimneys," he said. "They'll have to wait," said Florence. Mr. Rusty had written a letter to the local council, protesting about road conditions in the garden, and Florence agreed the traffic was getting heavier. Zebedee asked what the trouble was. "I'm campaigning for a green belt," said Mr. Rusty. "I'm sure you'll look very pretty," said Zebedee. "Shall we go?" In the garden, others were campaigning about a variety of things, and everyone, including Dillon, was busy preparing signs prohibiting or advocating or demanding various things for various needs. Even the birds. And Penelope. And the train. Between her shunting activities. And Mr. McHenry. And, of course, Brian. It was obvious some coordinating had to be done, so Zebedee asked them all to explain their signs. "Me first," said Brian. But Zebedee said he would leave it to Florence to choose the order, and would they please put their signs on the posts and explain. They agreed. "Everyone should be given a fair hearing," said Zebedee, and they agreed again. Democracy, said Zebedee. Lovely, said Ermintrude. Penelope was to be first, and she explained her sign meant danger, spiders at work. Dylan was next. Your turn, Dylan, said Florence. Lazy thing, said Penelope tartly. Dylan's sign was no hooting, rabbits sleeping. Ermintrude was next. I wonder what it'll be, thought Florence. It was keep off the flowers, and then it was Dougal's turn. Oh dear, thought Florence. Keep cows off the flowers, said Dougal. Doesn't look a bit like me, said Ermintrude haughtily. Mr. McHenry's turn, said Florence quickly. And Mr. McHenry's sign meant, apparently, scooters only. Cheek, said the train. And when Florence asked for her sign, put up one which simply said, trains only. The twin birds were next. Crazy, said Dylan, for their sign meant music permitted. Florence had a look at the signs. Do you know, we might get a bit cluttered, she said. It'll be more cluttered when lightning gets here, said Dougal. Lightning was on his way. 1 mile per hour maximum speed, said Brian. Typical, said Dougal. Mr. Rusty was last. Flowers are best, he said. Oh, I agree, said Florence. Dogs are best, said Dougal's well-known fact. Well, dogs are all right, said Mr. Rusty. Except one, watch where my eyes rest, said Brian. Zebedee asked if the signposting had gone well. All right, said Mr. Rusty, but I maintain there should be just one sign in the garden. Which one? Said Zebedee. This one, said Mr. Rusty. Mine. Man, said Dylan, I'm out of breath, like exhausted, you know. Do you want to be a Scottish rabbit or not? Said Dougal. What's going on, Dougal? Said Florence. Oh, I'm teaching yon rabbit the rudiments of the pipes, said Dougal. But yon rabbit didn't want to be taught the rudiments of the pipes. I feel kind of foolish, ma'am. Where are ye, wee rabbit? It's very wearing, ma'am, said Dylan, and he sat down to have another practice. It's an ill wind, said Dougal, etc., etc. Mr. McHenry wanted to know who was being tortured. It's Dylan, said Florence. And it's not torture, said Dougal. He's learning the noble art of bagpipes. Ah, bagpipes, said Mr. McHenry. I've got some of those somewhere. Well, there's hope for you yet, said Dougal. And when Dylan arrived, Mr. McHenry left to get his bagpipes. We'll have a pipe band, said Florence. Mr. McHenry came back with his bagpipes. What's that? Said Dougal. And Dylan. Well, I use the pipes to water the garden, said Mr. McHenry. Dougal left in disgust. Sacrilege, he said. Sacrilege. What's the hole for? Said Florence. That? Oh, that's for catching rain, said Mr. McHenry. That's a very useful instrument you have there, said Dylan. Florence called Zebedee, and when she asked him for a needle, he produced one. Any thread? Said Florence. No, I don't have any thread, said Zebedee. Now, what could I use instead? What are you looking at me for? Said Dougal. We need thread, they said. Not from me, said Dougal. Oh, one little piece, Dougal? about so long?" they said. "I can't spare it," said Dougal. "Get off." "Fiends." "You won't miss one little hair," said Mr. McHenry. "What?" "I am very attached to all of them," said Dougal. "So get off, get off, get off, get off!" "Fiends. Taking advantage of your shaggy friend. Fiends." "Well, it won't hurt," said Zebedee. "Really it won't." "No, it won't," said Florence. "Painless, ma'am." "Painless? Tearing great lumps of hair out by the roots? You're a band of savages. I'll report you all to the RSPCA, or the head of BBC One, whoever that might be." "What?" "There. Didn't hurt, did it?" "What?" "Thank you, Dougal." "Something tells me I've been taken advantage of," said Dougal. "And I hope your spring squeaks." "Oh, don't be like that," said Zebedee. Florence finished sewing Mr. McHenry's bagpipes. "Time for bed now," said Zebedee. "Can someone play a lullaby?" "Lullaby? Lullaby? That lot couldn't play any lorry if she had one hand tied behind her back. Lullaby." Dougal was worried about his eyes and was testing out a new pair of glasses. "You know, I really think I can see better with these. Much better." "Oops, takes a bit of getting used to." That's better. Now, long vision perfect. Now, what about close-ups? Let's see. Dougal's Japes by William Shakespeare. You know, I didn't know he'd written that. Now, visual identification test. Flowers, yes. Very good. Now, what's the time? 10 to 10, yes. You know, I couldn't see that clock just now. These glasses are marvellous. Now, a little drink. Now, what's that? Picture of me? I've never seen that before. Just think what I've been missing without glasses. It's a chastening thought. A chastening thought. Chastening. Florence arrived. "Hello, Dougal," she said. "What have you got glasses on for?" "Because I'm going deaf," said Dougal sarcastically. Oh, I see," said Florence. "Really?" said Dougal. "May I have a sit in your chair?" said Florence. "Be my guest." "Dougal, I really would like to know why you've got those glasses on," said Florence. "Isn't it obvious?" said Dougal. "We are none of us getting any younger. Even the keen-eyed and ever-watchful dog begins to need an artificial aid or two." "Oh, dear." "But, Dougal," said Florence. No, please don't interrupt," said Dougal. "I don't wear them for pleasure, you know." "But, Dougal—" Please don't try to be kind. I know what you're thinking. Poor old thing. He's past it. That's what you're thinking." "I'm thinking no such thing," said Florence. "If you'd just let me explain." "Explain? Explain? Oh, I know what you will explain. You will explain that your friend is still your friend, even though he was growing old and grey and useless. "Dougal, I think you're getting rather maudlin," said Florence. "And all I wanted to say was—" Stop! Think of all the famous people who had to wear glasses. Napoleon? Julius Caesar? I didn't know Julius Caesar wore glasses," said Florence. "Ignorant thing," said Dougal. "And then there was Genghis Khan and my Auntie Meggsy. One learns something new every day," said Florence. "Yes, one does if one listens to little old historical me," said Dougal. "But we are straying a little from the point, I think." Yes, we are," said Florence, "because—" "Now, you're going to say I look ridiculous," said Dougal. I know, but I shall have to learn to live with it, like Shakespeare. What can I say? Thought Florence. I'll be bumping into things soon, said Dougal heavily. Dougal, you haven't got your glasses on, said Florence very quickly. What? What do you mean, haven't got them on? What do you mean? What do you mean, haven't got my glasses on? What do you mean? They're sitting on top of your head, said Florence. But why didn't you tell me, said Dougal, instead of letting me wander around making a fool of myself? I tried, said Florence. Boo, said Zebedee. I like your hat, he said to Dougal, but it's time for bed. Good night, said Florence. Dougal was a bit put out by it all. Good night, Dougal. Yes, it's all right for some. They haven't gone around looking foolish all day. I'll go. Mr. Rusty was playing his barrel organ. You haven't played that for a long time, said Zebedee. And when Florence arrived, she asked to hear it again. So Mr. Rusty obliged. Bit tiring, he said. Going to the garden? Said Zebedee. Oh, yes, I think so, said Florence. Dougal was waiting. Hello, said Florence. But Dougal was strangely silent. What's wrong, Dougal? Yes, well, I wish I knew. Oh dear, thought Florence. And then she saw something. No birds, please. All birds out, please. Garden full. Thank you. See what I mean? No dogs, please. All dogs out, please. No dogs on the grass, please. No humans allowed. Thank you. Busy little Apeth, isn't she? Said Dougal, but I think she's got her values mixed up. No birds, no dogs, no humans, no cows, no snails. Thank you. Thank you. Florence didn't quite know what to make of it all. This garden is for the exclusive use of scarecrows. Thank you. If I don't keep a tight hold on myself, someone may get thumped, said Dougal. No thumping, no barking, no speaking. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, and thank you too, said Dougal, for nothing. No thanks, no tipping, thank you. Florence was in a quandary. What shall we do, she said. Well, I could think of something, said Dougal. Florence called Zebedee. Trouble, he said. It's her, whispered Florence. Oh, I know how to handle that, said Zebedee. So he handled it. I admit to being baffled, said Dougal. No baffling, thank you. Everything allowed, everyone in, thank you. Funny what a few new clothes will do, said Dougal. Yes, isn't it, said Florence. Thank you. Funny the things that go on, thought Florence happily. Thank you, thank you. I think I'll go and chase a few snails, said Dougal, make myself feel better. And he went. When Florence arrived, Mr. Rusty said he had a splendid idea. Oh, what is it? Said Florence. Hide and seek, said Mr. Rusty. Zebedee arrived. Hide and seek, he said. Yes, said Mr. Rusty, all of us. All of us, said Florence.
I see. All of us, said Zebedee. So they all went. In the garden, everyone was excited about the game of hide-and-seek, especially Brian. But who was hiding and who was seeking? Well, I'm hiding, said Dougal. Well, I prefer to hide, said Mr. Rusty, and Florence, and Mr. McHenry, and Dylan. We know who that leaves, said Dougal. Zebedee arrived. Have you decided who's it? He asked. Yes, they said. Brian, said Dylan. Snails are great at seeking, man. They are well known for it. Now, just a minute, said Brian. Just a minute. All decided, said Dougal. Everyone hide. So everyone went to hide. Right, you lot, said Brian. Hide, 'cause I shall be at you like a lynx. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Coming! Like a lynx. 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 Here I come, said Brian. Like a lynx, we know. None of the others had been found, not even Mr. Rusty or Mr. McHenry, who were both fairly visible. No one would be daft enough to hide in there, said Brian. Watch it. Dylan and Florence and Mr. Rusty and Zebedee hid on, while Brian sought. Not very good at it, is he? Said Mr. Rusty, and was caught immediately. Dougal began to get the impression that he was being toyed with. And Mr. McHenry discovered that hiding behind his motorbike didn't work. Dougal found Zebedee just before Brian did, and Florence gave herself up. Where's Lynx Eye? Said Dougal. But Zebedee decided it was time for everyone to go to bed. Thank you, Brian, said Florence. Good night. Good night, said Mr. Rusty. All exhausted, I suppose. Florence found Mr. Rusty in what he called a bit of a state. What's wrong? She asked. Well, I'll tell you if you don't go too far away, said Mr. Rusty. It's the television. Oh? Yes, they've lost their announcer. It's very careless of them, but they do come and go, you know. Zebedee arrived. What's going on? He said. Trouble on the telly? Hector's house on fire? Baba gone home to Africa? Dougal doing the weather forecast? Worse than that, said Mr. Rusty. We've got to find an announcer, said Florence, or no one will know what's going on. So they set out to find an announcer. Me, said Brian. How about me, ma'am? Said Dylan. Me? We'll have auditions, said Florence, then everyone can try. Look, I don't like to seem pushy, said Dougal, but Robert Dougal is a friend of mine. But Zebedee thought that friends in high places was an unfair advantage, and everyone should have an equal chance. Choose something to announce and announce it, he said. Ladies first. Drink more milk, said Ermintrude. Support your local cow. Thank you, darlings. She looks as though she could do with a bit of support, said Dougal. The weather forecast is as follows. If I lie down, it'll rain. If I stand up, it will snow. And if I don't do anything at all, you have to count 3 and run. Thank you. Was I lovely? Very good, said Florence. Zebedee said it was Dylan's turn next. Pardon me, ma'am. Thank you. Children, fellow citizens, fellow dogs, allow me to say a few words about flower power. As you know, I am a virtuoso on the guitar, and if I can remember a song, I'll play it for you. Dylan? Yes, ma'am. I shall go and put on my spotted bow tie. Brian was next. I should like to give you a short talk on the behaviour and loveliness of the common or garden snail. Anyone got a pair of steps? Dylan laughed. And so did Dougal. Yeah, I think you're all rotten, said Brian. And Zebedee said perhaps Dougal should have a try. Who, me? Me? Oh, yes. 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 Fluent, said Brian. Dougal had to have a piece of sugar to calm his nerves. And Florence asked him what he was going to announce. I'm thinking, said Dougal. My brain is at fever pitch. We're all agog, said Florence, looking at the Radio Times. And Dougal did his celebrated imitation of a dog eating sugar. Zebedee asked Florence whether she would like to audition. Oh, no, said Florence. Coward, said Dougal. Have a go, said Brian. Well, said Florence, all right. Everyone was delighted. Except Florence. The setter waits, said Zebedee. Get to it. Don't be nervous, said Dougal. Friends, said Florence. Viewers, she said. Time for bed, she said. Florence asked Mr. Rusty if he'd seen Zebedee, and Mr. Rusty said he hadn't, not for some time. So Florence called, and waited, and wondered, because it wasn't like Zebedee to be late when he said he'd be early. Stuck in the traffic, said Mr. Rusty. What traffic, said Florence, which made Mr. Rusty think. But before he could decide, Zebedee arrived. Sorry to be late, he said. Get stuck in the traffic, said Mr. Rusty. And then he realized he'd missed hearing something, but he couldn't think what. Did you notice anything, said Zebedee. Like not hearing something you usually hear, for instance? Oh, yes, said Florence. No boing. Exactly, said Zebedee. I'm using my spare spring, and it doesn't boing. Then we must do something about it, said Florence. Have you seen a spring, Dougal? She asked. Have I seen a what? Said Dougal. A spring, said Florence. Surely you mean the spring, said Dougal. Or the summer, or the autumn. Oh, no, you misunderstand me, said Florence. I mean Zebedee's spring. He's lost it, and I'm looking for it. Lost it? I thought he was attached to it, said Dougal. Look, why are you going the other way? he said peevishly. But Florence didn't listen. She was too busy looking for Zebedee's spring. "Good morning, Ermintrude." "Good morning, dear heart." "Have you seen a spring?" "Spring? Oh, what a lovely time. The flowers that bloom in the spring, tra-la." "Goodbye, Ermintrude," said Florence. "She's never been the same since she did all that moon jumping," said Dougal. "Oh, was that her?" said Florence. Dylan was asleep. "Don't bother," said Dougal. "He wouldn't know a spring from a hole in the ground." "I would too," said Dylan, to their utter amazement. "A spring makes a noise and a hole in the ground keeps silent. It's a natural law, ma'am." "Well, having sorted out that little problem, perhaps we can get on," said Dougal tartly. "Furthermore, a spring," said Dylan, "goes like this," said Florence. "Yes, we know. Thank you." "When you've quite finished pirouetting," said Dougal. "Oh, Dougal," said Florence. "Come on, Pavlova." "Oh, Dougal," said Florence. "Crazy," said Dylan. "Like, crazy. Now, who else can we ask?" said Florence. "I can think of someone," said Dougal darkly. "Boing, boing, 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 boing." "I might have known," said Dougal. "I might have known." "I like it, I like it." "Now that's naughty, Brian," said Florence. "I am setting," said Brian, "a new trend in snail behaviour." Boing, boing. Florence was infected. But Dougal was disgusted. "I refuse to notice what's going on," he said. "Spoil sport," said Florence. "Spoil sport?" said Dougal. "You wait till I get you home." "I like it, I like it." Oh well. Zebedee arrived and learnt the awful truth. "I'm afraid your spring's a bit bent," said Florence, giggling. "This is no laughing matter," said Zebedee. "Luckily I'm able to put it right, and I suggest it's time for bed." "Nice," said Florence. "Thank you," said Mr. Rusty. "Exhausting, though," he said. "I may have to fit a motor." "It wouldn't sound the same," said Florence, doing a little dance. "Do you like my little dance?" she said, doing it again. "I think it's very moving," said Mr. Rusty. "It brings tears to me eyes." Zebedee arrived. "What you doing?" he said. "Little dance," said Florence and Mr. Rusty. "Sorry I missed it," said Zebedee. In the garden, Florence called to Dougal, who wasn't there. Brian was. "I am shattered and destroyed," he said. "Why?" "Why? I'll tell you why. My shaggy chum has deserted me for another." "Another snail?" said Florence. "No, no, worse than that." "What?" "I thought I was his only Shelley friend. I was wrong." "Brian," said Florence, "you must take a grip on yourself and tell me all." Yes, I'll tell you all," said Brian. "It's an oyster. A common oyster with a knobby shell. And old Shaggy Briggs thinks it's lovely and talks to it all day. Great clump. I've never known anything like it in all my puff. Really I haven't. Really." Brian was speaking nothing but the truth. Dougal had an oyster. "You see?" said Brian. "Look out, Angus," said Dougal. "Ah, company," said the oyster. common mollusk, said Brian. He can talk, said Dougal. Yes, and so can I, said the oyster. Florence was quite overcome by the complications of it all. I've lost my pearl, said the oyster. He's lost his pearl, said Dougal. Nobody leaves the garden. Find the pearl. Everybody look. Everybody. Florence called Zebedee, who came. Trouble, he said. I've lost my pearl. Oh dear, said Zebedee, that will never do. Is this it? Looks like a pearl. My pearl, said the oyster. Come home. But the pearl hadn't, and seemingly didn't want to. Ungrateful thing, said Dougal. Hello, Pearl, said Brian. Got it? No, stop that. Stop it. No. Oh. Now, Pearl, said Florence, you're in the wrong shell. He'll sell you, said Dougal, if you don't come out. What shall we do? Said Florence. Don't worry, Angus, said Dougal. Florence called again, and Zebedee came back. Yes? Florence explained the pearl was lost again. Well, said Zebedee, you'd better find it, hadn't you? Yes, said Florence. Why don't you go back to Colchester, said Brian. Whitstable, said the oyster. I'll see you later, said Dougal. Fair weather, friend, said Brian. Good night, Angus. Florence greeted Dougal, who seemed to be in need of a little care and attention. You seem very pleased to see me, said Florence. Oh, I am, said Dougal. I am. Why particularly? Said Florence. Oh, I don't know, said Dougal. I was feeling a bit low, I suppose. Where have you gone? I'm here, said Florence, and I'm a bit worried about you, Dougal. Oh, really? Why? Said Dougal. You seem sad, said Florence. No, I'm not sad, said Dougal. Then what is it? Said Florence. Nothing, said Dougal. I think it's something, said Florence. Well, if you promise not to laugh, I'll tell you, said Dougal. But only if you promise not to laugh. I won't tell you if you don't promise. So you'd better promise, hadn't you? Promise? Promise? I promise, said Florence. Well, I want to have a go on the roundabout because I've never been, said Dougal quickly. But that's easy, said Florence, and she called Zebedee. Easy. He won't come, said Dougal sadly. But he did. Small request, said Florence briskly. Request away, said Zebedee. Oh, I feel such a fool, said Dougal. Fancy wanting to go on a roundabout at my age. It's pathetic. Pathetic. Florence explained to Zebedee about Dougal. Don't put yourself out, said Dougal. But Zebedee said it would be no trouble at all. He would be absolutely delighted, and hoped they'd both enjoy themselves. Dougal was overcome. I'm very grateful, he said. I know I'm grumpy and don't deserve it. Go on like that and you won't get it, said Zebedee. Oh, come on, said Florence. Let's go. Dougal arrived sedately, to find Florence waiting. I'm arriving, he said. "Well, this is it," said Florence. "It's lovely," said Dougal, climbing on. "Doesn't go very fast, does it?" "Doesn't go at all until you started," said Mr. Rusty. Dougal apologized for his ignorance. "I'm not used to high living," he said. "I'm just a poor country dog with no experience of the big wide world. No experience at all." "Well, are you ready?" said Mr. Rusty. And Dougal said he was very ready. "Thank you." Florence thought Dougal was rather overdoing the humility, but she didn't say anything, and Mr. Rusty started things off. "Enjoying it?" they asked. Dougal wasn't too sure. "Lovely sensation, isn't it?" said Mr. Rusty. But again, Dougal wasn't too sure. "I'm not too sure," he said. "And if you don't mind, I'll just get off. I'll try. Yeah, I think I'll just get off if you don't mind. Get off. All right, Dougal." "Oh yes, lovely," said Dougal. "Lovely. It's absolutely lovely. I just feel sick, that's all." Brian was waiting for Dougal, who seemed to be in a hurry. "Oh, I got up so late this morning I don't know whether I'm coming or going." "You're going, old speedy mate," said Brian. "I've got a million things to do and I've not had time to put a comb through my hair yet." "Yes, looks like it," said Brian. "Bit shaggier than usual, if that's possible." "What?" "Choose your words, snail." "It's true. You could do with having your barnet trimmed." "What a vulgar expression." "Yeah, well, I'm a vulgar snail." "You can say that again." "Well, get your hair cut," said Brian. "I will," said Dougal, "if I can find someone sufficiently sensitive. Someone who realizes that I don't just want a quick top and tail. In short, an artiste." Florence met Mr. Rusty, and they passed the time of day. "Lovely day," said Florence. "Beautiful," said Mr. Rusty. "Like you." "Oh, thank you," said Florence. Zebedee arrived. "Late as usual," said Florence. "You'll make me cry," said Zebedee. "No, I won't," said Florence. She looked for Dougal and couldn't see him anywhere. "Oh, I wonder where he is," she mused. She saw something. "Never seen that before. I wonder what it is." There was a noise. Florence stopped and was amazed to see Dylan apparently working. "Why, Dylan!" "Ma'am, welcome. Welcome to my hairdressing boutique. Welcome. Are you, comfortable, sir?" "Sir" was Dougal. Don't disturb the curlers, sir, until I use the setting lotion," said Dylan. "Curlers?" said Florence, aghast. "Setting lotion?" "Sir, you really must keep still, or all my efforts will be ruined. 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 Pardon me." Florence had never seen Dylan like this. He seemed quite agitated and distraught. Perhaps you'd care to look, sir?" he said.
Sir looked. "Can't see anything," he said. "One needs to remove the towel," said Dillon. "If you'll just wait a moment, I'll take it off. Yes, just a finishing touch." "Don't you dare," said Dougal. Florence pretended not to know who it was and said hello very politely. "Hello," said Dougal. And Florence waited for something to happen. And something happened all right. "Where are you going?" "You haven't finished yet, you rabbit, you." Florence found herself losing control. How do I look?" said Dougal. "Chic? Elegant? That's what I was promised." "Have a look," said Florence. So Dougal looked. "What's that sheep doing there?" "Oh, it's me. It's me. I'll sue him. I'll bury his guitar. Ow! You wait till I find him. I'll make him rue the day he set foot in this garden. Savage. Call himself a hairdresser. He couldn't dress a football. Come back! Come back!" Mr. Rusty was reading a book. "Very interesting, that. Yes, very interesting." "What's that?" said Florence. "A book," said Mr. Rusty. "I found it in an old junk shop, and it's very interesting. You have a look." So Florence did. "It's all about magic jugs and bottles." "Oh, yes," said Florence. "Very interesting." "Course, I don't believe it," said Mr. Rusty. "Why?" said Florence. Oh, you asked me that a bit suddenly," said Mr. Rusty. I'm not sure why." Florence called Zebedee. "Hello all," he said. "Have a read of that book," said Mr. Rusty. So Zebedee read it. Thoroughly. "Do you think it's true?" said Florence. "Well, anything's possible," said Zebedee. And Florence became very excited. "Careful," said Zebedee. "I bought something else," said Mr. Rusty. But they were so busy getting excited about reading about magic pots and things, they didn't see Mr. Rusty's other bargain. Until it had arrived. Amongst them. "I told you," said Zebedee. "I do," said the pot. "I'm a pot." "We can see that," said Zebedee, "but what sort of pot?" "A talking pot," said Mr. Rusty. "I foresee a little trouble," said Zebedee. "No need to be like that," said the pot. "Oh dear," said Zebedee. "Now don't worry," said Florence. "I'll go and look for it." "Yes, well, that's what I'm worried about," said Zebedee. What was that whooshing noise? I heard a whooshing noise. I hate a whooshing noise. Did you hear a whooshing noise? No, said Florence. Ears bad? Certainly not. Oh, and I don't think it's nice to imply that I'm hearing things. I wasn't. I am renowned for my observation and hearing. Oh! How do, said the pot. How do? What is it? Hissed Dougal. I'm glad you asked me that, said the pot. I am a magic pot, with magic spots, and unless you do as you're told, you'll cop it. All right? No, it is very far from all right, said Dougal. You are an uninvited pot. Don't be like that, lad, said the pot. You don't want to upset me, do you? It's a matter of supreme indifference to us, they said, and then they wished they hadn't. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. What have you done? Said Dougal. Yes, yes, what? Said Florence. I warned you, said the pot. Come back at once, said Dougal. Zebedee arrived. Are you going to change them back? He asked. No, said the pot.
Oh, said Zebedee, then you'll have to go. And he went to see what he could do. Oops, try again. Florence and Dougal felt very strange, and Dougal had to have some sugar to calm his shattered nerves. I've never been a flower before, said Florence, and Zebedee said she was lucky not to be a flower still. Have a piece of sugar, said Florence. It always seems to help Dougal. Here you are. Watch it, said Dougal. An elephant never forgets, you know. Now what was I trying to remember, said Zebedee. Oh yes, time for bed. Mr. Rusty was looking at the moon through his telescope. Looks quite close, he said. What are you looking at? Said Florence. The moon, said Mr. Rusty. I wouldn't mind going there to have a look round. No, indeed, I wouldn't mind going there. I don't wish to stifle the spirit of enterprise, said Zebedee, but it has been done. Oh, you, said Florence. In the garden, Florence couldn't find Dougal anywhere. So she asked Brian. Well, said Brian, far be it from me to tell tales about my old chum, but he does appear to have lost his cool, rather. Whatever do you mean? Said Florence. He's flipped. Flipped? Don't you understand English? Said Brian. I thought I was making myself abundantly clear. Our shaggy friend has gone dotty. Oh, said Florence. Is that all? I thought it was something serious. Brian laughed. He's over here. Of course, I'm only joking. Really? Yes, I know, said Florence. Dougal did appear to be up to something unusual, to say the least. Now, let me see. The square on the hypotenuse equals the volume of Archimedes minus the square root of Pythagoras, which gives us a grand total of 7.5. Except on Thursdays, which have 31. Yes. What are you doing, Dougal? Asked Florence. Isn't it obvious? Said Dougal. No, it's not, said Brian. Nothing's obvious to you, great oaf, said Dougal. I don't suppose you could even spell geometry, which is what I am concerning myself with at the moment. I am conducting an experiment in dimensions. Of the moon? Said Florence. Moon? Who cares about the moon? This is to do with the exact sizing of a lump of sugar. How did the moon get into this? Very important work, said Brian. Yes, it is, said Dougal. So I'll trouble you. Oh, swallowed me chalk. Florence had a look round. I'm very impressed, said Brian. Now do let me get on, said Dougal. I'm sure Isaac Newton didn't have snails bothering him. Who's Isaac Newton? Said Brian. Did he invent sugar? But Dougal was too busy experimenting to reply. Let me see. What's all this then? Said Brian. I can see all my results ruined with you two, said Dougal. 3'10", said Florence. Thank you, said Dougal. Now, 3'10" by 3'10"? I didn't know I'd got sugar that size. No, I'm 3'10", said Florence. Back to the drawing board, old thing, said Brian. And don't add in the date. In spite of interruptions, said Dougal, icily, I have reached an answer. And that's it. 3 is the answer. Eureka. Eureka? Eureka? A cube is a cube, is a cube, is a cube, said Dougal. Dougal and Florence were up rather late one day, and wondering where all the stars had gone. "Do you think it's cloudy?" said Florence. "Well, that would be the simple explanation," said Dougal. "What do you mean?" said Florence. "Well, you never know in this place, do you? I expect someone switched them off." "Oh, can you do that?" said Florence. "Can you do it? Of course you can do it." "Oh, I didn't know," said Florence. "The ignorance," said Dougal. "Now, I didn't come here to be insulted," said Florence. "Oh, hoity-toity," said Dougal. "And anyway, I'm not at all sure you're right," said Florence. "Have you ever known me to be wrong?" said Dougal. Florence looked at him. "Well, I mean about basic, well-known things like stars," said Dougal. I may have made little errors in the past about minor matters. Well, I'm only human, you know." "But you're not human," said Florence. Well, if you're going to get personal," said Dougal, "you can go and look at the stars with someone else. I shan't care." And he got all huffy. "Now, there's no need to get huffy," said Florence. "Who's huffy?" said Dougal. "I'm never huffy." "I only said you weren't human," said Florence, "and you get huffy." "I thought we came to look at the stars," said Dougal, huffily. So they counted the stars, which had come out during the argument, and found there was still quite a lot missing. "Yes, quite a lot missing," said Dougal darkly. "Someone has been tampering." So they counted them again. I make it 1 short now," said Dougal. "I wonder where it is," said Florence. Dylan arrived. "I've found the craziest thing over there," he said. "Over where?" said Dougal. "Over where? "Why, over there, man," said Dylan. "Craziest thing you ever saw." "I presume eventually he'll tell us what it is," said Dougal. But Dylan said he'd show them what it was. And it was the missing star, come down into the garden for a change of scene. It's a bit dark here, isn't it?" said the star sweetly. "Well, what do you expect?" said Dougal. "You're supposed to be up there shining away. On strike, I suppose." "It's very pretty," said Florence. "Thank you," said the star. "You may call me Estelle." "Estelle?" said Florence. "Well, it should be Stella, but I changed it, because I think Estelle is much more suitable these days, don't you? Any star who is anyone is called Estelle." "I don't know what this garden's coming to," said Dougal. "I really don't." "Oh, you," said Florence. "Listen." Oh, I feel like lighting up," said the star. Back to work, I hope, said Dougal. Oh, I wish I was a star, said Florence, sighing. Is this the day we were going to have our picnic? Said Mr. Rusty. Yes, it is, said Florence. Have you got everything? Everything? Said Mr. Rusty. Yes, for the picnic, said Florence. Oh, yes, the picnic, said Mr. Rusty. And he went away, mumbling. They waited for him. I hope you've remembered the corkscrew, said Zebedee, but if that's all you forget, it should be a great success. Off you go. So they went. Dougal was ready for the picnic. Got everything? He said. Corkscrew? No one ever remembers a corkscrew. Well, we've remembered, said Florence. And a tablecloth, said Dougal. I'm not eating off the bare ground, you know. I've got to have a tablecloth. Damask. None of your plastic. Oh, come on, said Florence. Mr. Rusty wasn't sure they'd remembered everything. I feel sure there's something, he said. I've remembered the salt and pepper, said Brian. I am the most useful and resourceful of snails, you must admit. All together now, for he's a jolly good fellow. Now that'll do, Brian, said Florence. Sorry, said Brian. Now, will here do, said Florence. Any ants? Said Dougal. I can't abide an ant. We're not all here yet, said Mr. Rusty, waving the corkscrew. Ermintrude arrived. Oh, I love a picnic, she mooed. It's so lovely, eating out of doors. What is she on about? Said Dougal. She always eats out of doors. It's a well-known habit of cows, eating out of doors. I'll bet no one's remembered a corkscrew, said Ermintrude, and salt and pepper. Oh, yes, we have, said Mr. Rusty and Brian. So there. Dylan arrived. I've brought these cushions for the picnic, he said, because I feel everyone should be comfortable, ma'am. Comfort is very important at picnics. Mr. McHenry had brought all sorts of useful things like knives and forks and spoons and plates and vases of flowers and placemats. No finger bowls, said Dougal. Florence took the cushions. Nearly ready? Said Dylan. Then I'll arrive. Looks very pretty, said Brian, and Dougal and Florence agreed. And so did Mr. Rusty and Ermintrude. Very pretty, they said. There's just one thing, said Dylan. Did anyone bring any, food? Food? Said Mr. McHenry. I don't think I can bear it, said Dougal. And they all realized they'd forgotten to bring the food. We're all soppy, said Brian. No one can possibly realize how humiliated I feel, said Dougal. Florence was waiting for Zebedee, who arrived. I'm a bit late, he said, because I was trying to get a ticket for the exhibition. What exhibition? Said Florence. The one in the garden, said Zebedee. The one everyone's been talking about. It's very difficult to get a ticket, so I wouldn't bother to go if I were you. You won't be able to get in, and then you'll be disappointed, won't you? Oh, you are infuriating, said Florence. Of course I shall get in. Dougal and the others were waiting. Hello, said Florence brightly. Got your ticket? Said Dougal. Very difficult to get in without a ticket, you know. Got a ticket? Oh, Dougal, said Florence. Dylan told her she didn't have to have a ticket. Do I have to have a ticket? Said Ermintrude. No, ma'am, said Dylan. Anyone with a tail gets in free. So, you qualify, he said, laughing. When you're all quite finished, said Dougal. Lead on, mighty leader, said Brian. And they all went to the exhibition, which Florence had been asked to open. I declare this exhibition open, she said. Very prettily done, said Dougal. It was an exhibition of pictures. How lovely, said Florence. Not quite the word I would have chosen, said Dougal. Anigonioni's latest, I presume. Brian found a picture he liked. What delicate brushwork, he said. That'll look very good in my kitchen. This one seems familiar, said Ermintrude. Is it you, Florence, dear? They looked at Brian's portrait. A very good likeness, said Ermintrude. Yes, but has it caught the essential me? Said Brian. Nothing's essential about you, said Dougal. Now don't be unkind, said Ermintrude. They looked around some more. Dylan and Brian admired the carrot picture as connoisseurs. 4 carrots in a fog, said Dougal. Look over here, said Ermintrude. My effort, ma'am, said Dylan, modestly. I mace you, said Ermintrude. You wouldn't stand still, said Dylan. Well, I like it, said Brian. You like anything, said Dougal. Well, I think they're all lovely, said Ermintrude. Don't you? Yes, they said, even though Dougal had some doubts about Brian's portrait, and said so. And they all had doubts about another portrait. For some reason, it seemed a little familiar, although they couldn't place the face. What I want to know, said Dougal, is what she's laughing at. She's smiling, said Florence. Well, I think she's got a very funny look on her face, said Dougal, and I wouldn't want to meet her in the garden after dark. I can tell you that. Come to think of it, I wouldn't want to meet anything in the garden after dark. Florence called to Zebedee. You called, madame, and I arrive, he said. Your wish is my command, as they say. And he did a little twirl. I'm in good twirling form today, he said. Want to do anything special? Trip to the moon? Round the world? Visit the garden? The garden, I think, said Florence. I think you're wise, said Zebedee. Shall we go? And they went. Florence greeted Dougal. Oh, I'm glad you've arrived, he said. I'm having a terrible time here today. I can't tell you what it's like. Listen, if you can bear to, because I can't. said Dougal, has been going on since I got up. I'm seriously thinking of suing someone. If it's only the BBC. But who is it? Said Florence. Who do you think? Said Dougal. It's that rabbit and that snail. Great clumps. Silence! It seems we are not appreciated, snail friend, said Dillon. I think you're right, Maestro, said Brian. Dillon tried again, but it wasn't very good. Dillon? Ma'am, said Dillon, I am trying to interpret this very difficult music, and I must ask you not to interrupt. Cheek, said Dougal. He is an artiste, said Brian, and so am I. You're about as artistic as a bottle of red cabbage, said Dougal, and not nearly so pretty. Oh, come on. I'll give you a hand. Florence could stand it no longer. You must have the music upside down, she said. Dougal was deeply humiliated. I'll never get into the proms now, he said, and I was looking forward to giving them Land of Hope and Glory, and a snatch of the 1813. I can't read music anyway, said Brian, while Florence turned the music round. I feel a bit sick, said Dougal. Florence asked Mr. Rusty if Zebedee had arrived yet, and Mr. Rusty said he hadn't. Oh, said Florence. And Zebedee arrived. I hear tales of cooking in the garden, he said. Now, let me see. Have I got everything? Oh dear, people come to plague me. We haven't come to plague you, they said. We're spectators, they said. Oh, joy, said Dougal heavily. What you making, old cooker? Said Brian. Pancakes, said Dougal. You're lovely, said Brian. Florence read the recipe. What next? Said Dougal. Milk? Said Florence. Ah, well, yes. Well, I am waiting for the milk, aren't I? Said Dougal. About time, said Dougal. Herbs? Said Florence. Yes, I'm waiting for those too, said Dougal. The herbs arrived. Here we are, said Mr. McHenry. Essence of herb, straight from the garden. Well, perhaps I can get on now, said Dougal. Yes, I think you probably can, said Florence. And Dillon said he'd play some pancake music to help things along. Dylan dropped off, but the pancake making went on. Dylan, refreshed, played on. When are we going to, eat, man? Said Dylan. Oh, I love a pancake, said Ermintrude. Florence cooked the first pancake. Now, careful, said Mr. Rusty. Don't burn yourself. Now, toss your pancake in the air. That's the right way. So Florence tossed the pancake. Bravo, said Ermintrude. My turn, said Dougal. But Dylan got there first. Suits you, Snail, said Dougal, giggling. I'm a failure, men, said Dylan. Yes, you are, said Brian. Hit me right on the bonce. Are you implying my pancakes are heavy? Said Dougal. I make the lightest pancakes in the world. I'll have you know, in the trade they are known as Dougal's Delights. Mr. McHenry was worried about his heliotropes. Don't seem well, he said. So Florence and Dougal said they were going that way and would have a look. You know, I've never really believed in heliotropes, said Dougal. Oh, why? Said Florence. Oh, I don't know, said Dougal. The name, I suppose. Can't take them seriously, really. Here they are, said Florence. Look a bit bent, said Dougal. Do you think they've been got at? The flowers did look a little strange and twisted. I think we've got a problem here, said Dougal. We've got the problem, said the heliotrope. What is it? Said Florence. And the flowers explained that being under the trees, it was a bit difficult to get enough sun, and they'd all twisted their stalks trying to get out of the shade. We're planted wrong, they complained, and we're considering strike action. Yes, well, that should be interesting, said Dougal. It's all very well for you to scoff, said the heliotrope, but I'll bet you wouldn't like to have a bent stalk. Florence asked if they could help, and the flower said the only way they could help was to get them into the sun, and that was difficult. Yes, tricky, said Florence. But, as she said to Dougal, something had to be done, or the garden would be full of droopy heliotropes, and that would be a bit depressing. Yes, you can say that again, said Dougal. Nothing worse than a droopy heliotrope. Of course, we could always dig them up and plant them somewhere else, but then they'd have to be watered and mulched and all that horticultural rubbish. Perhaps we should give Fred Streeter a ring. What do you think? Florence saw Brian and explained the problem to him. Well, I don't see the difficulty, said Brian. Clever boots, said Dougal. Florence asked Brian what he thought they should do. Well, as I see it, said Brian, you need a bit of sun. And they agreed that this was so. But how to get it? Said Florence. Yes, tell us that, said Dougal. We must catch some, said Brian. Catch some, said Florence and Dougal. Catch some, shouted the heliotropes. Well, you've heard of sun traps, haven't you? Said Brian. Come on. I've got a feeling this is going to end in disaster, said Dougal. But Penelope seemed quite hopeful. I'm very good at sun traps, she said. So Florence asked her to trap some for them. And she did. Show me your droopy heliotropes, she said. All may not be lost. Penelope's sun trap was a great success. Does Bert Ford know about this? Said Dougal. I don't think we'll tell him, said Florence. He may cry. The flowers were very grateful. How can we thank you, they said. Give us a kiss, said Brian. I hope we don't get into trouble over this, said Dougal. Why should we? Said Florence. Well, we've nicked someone's bright period, haven't we? Said Dougal. If it's here, it can't be there, can it? Oh, no, said Florence. Oh, well, said Dougal. Dylan woke up and began to think about his life. Like, where am I going? Is it true what they say? Do I sleep too much? Dougal was having a little think as well. Now, where's that rabbit? It's got to stop. The time has come, definitely. You know, I don't think I've ever once seen him leaping about like a rabbit. And what about all this hole digging he's supposed to do? Not one single hole dug in years. He's getting rabbits a bad name, that's what he's doing. Now, I'm as tolerant as the next dog, but it's got to stop. He'll be growing his hair next and voting Liberal. Dylan's worries about his life were making him walk in his sleep. And when he woke up and found himself on his feet, he got more worried than ever. I'm cracking up, he thought. Oh my, oh my, oh my. What shall I do? He groaned. You have a problem, little furry mate, said Brian. I can tell by your nose. You leave my nose out of this, said Dougal. Zebedee asked what the matter was. That rabbit, said Dougal. He'll have to go. That rabbit had decided that a few gentle exercises might be a good idea. And perhaps a little sprint. All he needs is a little exercise, said Zebedee. He should get a dog. What am I saying? He went to see Florence, who was doing a few exercises too. They're worried about Dylan, he said. Oh, said Florence. I'd better go and see then. Dylan was still at it, swimming, using a stool instead of water, even though water would have been less hazardous. Shadow boxing, which he found even more exhausting. 7, 8, 9, 10, out, they said. Now, what do you mean about my nose? Said Dougal. Well, when you get worried, it twitches, said Brian. Florence asked Dylan if he thought the exercises were doing him any good. Do you feel any better? She asked. Ma'am, I feel dreadful, said Dillon. I'm beginning to think a person shouldn't try to change his natural way of life. And with me, sleeping is in, and exercise is out, out, out. Out. I wonder, said Florence. Now listen, said Dougal. Oh, man, spare me, said Dillon. Can I help it if I'm naturally, lazy? Now listen, said Dougal. But Dillon didn't. He's running, said Dougal. You know it's time for bed, said Zebedee. Yes, I could do with a sleep, said Dougal. Touché. Hello, said Mr. Rusty. Hello, said Florence. Just giving the old barrel a turn, said Mr. Rusty. Yes, I heard it, said Florence. Zebedee arrived. Shall we go? Said Florence. Why not? Said Zebedee. Yes, why not? Said Florence. In the garden, she looked for Dougal. Who was looking for her, somewhat agitatedly. Ah, there you are. Oh, I'm very glad to see you. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you. Why? Said Florence. Oh, I wish you hadn't asked me that, said Dougal, because I don't know how to break it to you. I know you're very fond of her. Who? Said Florence. Who? Oh, I don't think I should tell you, you know. Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Now who, Dougal? Ermintrude. I'm afraid she's been affected by all those poppies she's been eating. Poppies? Said Florence. Well, it's either that or the pansies. I don't know which is worse. But whatever it is, the poor old thing's in a very bad way. I think her moon-jumping days are over anyway, if she ever did it. Which I doubt. It's always seemed a very unlikely story to me. Very unlikely. Dougal, said Florence, will you kindly tell me what this is all about? All right, said Dougal. That cow is flying a kite. Kite, said Florence. A kite, said Dougal. C-I-T-E, kite. She is flying a kite. How lovely, said Florence. Lovely, said Dougal. It's unnatural. Cows don't fly kites. Cows eat grass and do a lot of mooing and lying about in fields and things of that nature. Well, perhaps she felt like a change, said Florence. That's hardly a reason to fly a kite, said Dougal. I've brought you a few flowers to nibble, said Dougal, kindly. Bless you, dear boy, said Ermintrude. What are you doing? Said Dougal. I'm flying my kite, said Ermintrude. Very relaxing. Would you like to have a try? That's very kind of you, said Dougal. Well, hold on tight, said Ermintrude, with reason. What? 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 Help! Help! It's a very good kite, said Ermintrude. I do hope he doesn't lose it. I hope we don't lose Dougal, said Florence. Oh, don't worry, dear thing, said Ermintrude. He'll come down to earth, eventually. Florence rushed to the scene. All right, Dougal, she said. You cannot imagine, said Dougal, how infuriating a question like that can be when you've just been up in a kite and crashed. That was lovely, said Florence. Oh, I'm not really very skilled, said Mr. Rusty. You are, said Florence. I'm better at bird imitations, really, said Mr. Rusty. I do a very good pigeon. Go on, then, said Florence. Oh, no, I couldn't do it now, said Mr. Rusty. I have to be in the mood to do me bird imitations. What a pity, said Florence, and she called to Zebedee, who arrived. Mr. Rusty won't do his bird imitations, said Florence. You're lucky, whispered Zebedee. Oh, you're awful, said Florence. I know, said Zebedee. Why don't you go and hear some real birds? Perhaps they'll do an imitation of Mr. Rusty. So Florence went. Dougal was waiting. Hello, Dougal, said Florence. Are there any birds about? Are there any what about? Said Dougal. Birds, said Florence. I thought you said birds, said Dougal. Yes, I did, said Florence. Mr. McHenry came along, and Florence asked him if there were any birds she could listen to. Mr. McHenry said he'd take her to see some, and Florence thanked him. What's this sudden interest in those little feathered fiends? Said Dougal. What's wrong with going back to my place for a cup of tea, Later, said Mr. McHenry. This is where the birds learn to sing, said Mr. McHenry. Really? Said Florence. Yes, said Mr. McHenry. It's a sort of University of the Air, the only place where you can get a degree in warbling and allied subjects. Well done, Edward. Beautiful, Trevor, beautiful. Strictly for the birds, giggled Dougal. Hush, said Florence. Listen, said Mr. McHenry. Getting better, Doreen? Watch your volume, Derek. Lovely, Ursula. June, perfect. All together now? clever, isn't it? Said Mr. McHenry. Very, said Florence. What do you mean, clever? They're supposed to sing. If they started barking, it'd be different. Oh, Dougal. Well, why don't they learn something useful? Like plumbing. Mr. McHenry had lost something and was looking for it. Wherever can it be? He said. Florence came along. Hello, she said. You haven't seen it by any chance, have you? Said Mr. McHenry. Seen what? Said Florence. It's escaped, said Mr. McHenry. It's very worrying. Dougal was looking for something too. Now, where is it? He said. What? Said Florence. What's everyone looking for? I can't find it anywhere, said Brian. No, you wouldn't, said Dougal. Typical. Oh, don't be like that, said Brian. What is it? Said Florence. I don't know, said Brian. I was just told to look for it, and I always do as I'm told, because I'm little and lovable, and everyone takes advantage of me. Of course, I mention no names, but watch where me eyes rest. I can't find it, dear heart, said Ermintrude. Well, it's big enough, said Dougal. Nevertheless, said Ermintrude. Really, said Dougal. It would help if we knew what we were looking for, said Ermintrude. Exactly, said Brian. We need information. Can't find it, man, said Dillon. Like nowhere. I'm not surprised, said Ermintrude. Suddenly, they heard something. That's it, said Dougal. What is? Said Brian. That, said Dougal. Scatter and find it. So they scattered to find it. I scattered the wrong way. A strange object appeared. That's it, hissed Dougal. It landed. Oh! Well, I never. Whatever next? That was it, said Dougal. If I'd known, I'd never have looked, said Ermintrude. What a fright I got. Was that it? Said Brian. Yes, was that it? Said Dillon. Like, it? And they said it was. Crazy, said Dillon. I couldn't agree more, said Ermintrude. Horrible thing. Mr. McHenry came back and told them he still couldn't find it anywhere. They asked him what he was looking for. Well, it's my new flying planting machine, he said. It flies. Does it indeed? Said Dougal. Yes, it does, said Mr. McHenry. I call it the flying saucer. That's what I wanted you to find, said Dougal. Well, we found it, dear thing, said Ermintrude. I don't want to worry anyone, said Dillon. What do you mean? Said Mr. McHenry, worried. Well, it's that machine of yours, said Dillon. It's like driving me crazy. It keeps planting things, and every time I want to take a little sleep, it wakes me up and plants something on me. I got an earful of primrose roots, man. I mean, flower power is one thing, but this is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Time for bed, I suppose, said Florence. How do you expect me to sleep, said Dougal, with that thing about?
Brian.
How much longer? Said Dougal. I've got a crick in my neck. My left front foot's gone to sleep and my nerves are jangling. Absolutely jangling. Nearly finished, ma'am. Have you caught the essential me? For Dylan was making a sculpture of Dougal. I wouldn't want anyone to see it before it's finished. Do you think that notice will keep them away? Asked Dougal. Meanwhile, Florence and Mr. Rusty were talking. What do you think of the international situation? Said Florence. I try not to, said Mr. Rusty. Very wise, said Florence. I wonder where Zebedee is. And they called him. And he arrived. There's something creative going on in the garden, he said. Oh, said Florence. Oh, said Ermintrude. I can't begin to tell you what's going on here. Try, said Florence. Have a guess, said Ermintrude. Go on. You've jumped over the moon, said Mr. Rusty. Silly thing, said Ermintrude. I don't do that any more. And she went to see how Dougal's sculpture was coming on. Please, ma'am, said Dylan. It's not finished yet. We'll let you know, said Dougal. Oh, it's not finished yet, and they're going to let us know, said Ermintrude. Oh, the excitement of it all. Ha ha, tra-la, tra-la. What? Said Florence. Secret? Dylan carried on working. 7 inches? Wow. What do you mean, wow? It's just like I have to rethink the nose, man. It's 7 inches across. Like, wow. That is an epic nose. Wow. Wow. It's nothing. Hello, hello, said Brian, much to Dylan's fury. He had to have silence while he was working, he said. So zip your screamer, said Dougal, rather coarsely. Oh, said Brian. Did you hear that? The train arrived. Dylan was in despair. Anyone want to go anywhere? Said the train. I just want silence, said Dylan, slightly hysterically. You've upset him now, said Dougal. Well, I don't know, I'm sure, said the train. Open your mouth and you get your funnel bitten off. It wasn't like this in the sidings at Clapham, I can tell you. And she left. I have never known anything like it in all my puff, she said. Ah! Sorry, said Mr. McHenry. And Dylan said he really didn't know what he was doing anymore. No, doesn't look like it, said Dougal. Hello all, said Mr. McHenry. Dylan lost control. He's lost control. Who's not to be disturbed, said Mr. Rusty. I can't go on, said Dylan. I can't. Something went on. I've something to say, said the clay statue. It's like, time for bed. Babies. Zebedee had gathered together an orchestra, and the concert was about to begin. Follow me closely, he said, hopefully. And they all said they would. We are poised, said Brian. Ermintrude was worried. Am I doing it right, darlings? No, you're jolly well not, said Brian. I thought not. May we try again? Said Zebedee. Oh, silly old me. It was never like this in the Halle. Get your hooves out of it. No need to be like that, said Ermintrude. And Zebedee restarted. All together now, he said. No, ma'am, said Dillon. Follow the beat. Please. Ermintrude promised to try harder and apologized for holding them up. Fun, though, she said. Zebedee, undaunted, tried again. Hey, I've just noticed. It's a long way down, isn't it? Just play, said Dillon. I'm stuck. Oh, ma'am, said Dillon. I don't think Brian's very happy, said Florence. I'm stuck on a harp. Well, you would choose the harp, wouldn't you? Great oaf. I think you're rotten. Ermintrude was all for carrying on without the harp. So Zebedee said they'd better. Ignore all harp cues, he said. And drum cues, said Ermintrude. How humiliating, said Dougal. Florence thought they should get on, and so did Dillon. Ermintrude was prepared to give her all. I'm still stuck. Oh, what is the point of it all? Said Dougal. Come on, kitten on the keys, he said, which made Ermintrude very cross. Get off, said Dougal. Cheeky thing. Zebedee had one last try. Brian solved his particular problem. I'm unstuck, he said. And lovely with it. I think a lullaby to finish with, sighed Zebedee, as it's time for bed. Oh, said Dougal. Who's our flat friend? I've left my pack, said the card. Dougal and Florence considered this. I was getting a bad deal, said the card. Shuffled, said Florence. We shuffle ourselves, said the card. It's fun when you do it fast. Yes, we can imagine, they said. The card looked sad. They'll turn up, said Dougal. Cards usually do. I'm not going back, said the card. Well, they can't play without you, said Dougal. So they're sure to look, aren't they? Yes, you don't know some of them, said the card. That Queen of Spades, she's a right terror. Oh, said Florence. Oh, you wouldn't believe it, said the card. Tell us, they said. Well, she's jealous, said the card. Jealous. Dougal and Florence couldn't believe such things went on in a pack of cards. But they soon found out. "I'll never be able to play patience again," said Dougal. "Where is he?" said the Queen of Spades. "Oh, she looks a right madam," whispered Dougal. "Where is he?" said the King of Clubs. "Shall we tell?" said Dougal. "Oh, I don't know," said Florence. "Where is he?" asked the other cards. "He's always getting out, and when we catch him we're going to wallop him." "Wallop him," they said. "Wallop him well." Florence and Dougal thought the pack of cards was rather fierce, for a pack of cards. "Yes, they're awful," said the lost card. But the other cards asked Dougal and Florence to see it from their point of view. I mean, what was the good of a pack with one card missing? "We can't be played with," they said. "And that's no fun," they said. "That's quite true," said Florence. "Whose side are you on?" "The side of reason," said Florence. And the King and Queen thought that was very clever, and asked everyone to give her a big hand. "A pack with one missing is hopeless," said Florence. And all the cards cheered like anything. "All right, I'll go back," said the Jack of Hearts. And they shuffled him in before he could say 3 no trumps. "Goodbye," they said. "Care for a game of snap?" said Dougal. But Florence thought it was probably time for bed. "All change," said the train. "This is as far as I'm prepared to go." "What?" said Dougal. What? "What? What me know what's," said the train. "There is a very steep bridge ahead, and you're all very heavy. Besides, I'm exhausted." "But," said Florence. "But me no buts," said the train tartly. "My mind is made up." "But we're passengers," said Florence. "And some of us have even paid," said Dougal. The train backed out. "Shh! You're backing out," said Dougal. "I think you're both being very unreasonable," said the train. "I'm rather hurt. I do my best to get you from one place to another, and I never complain." "You're complaining now," said Dougal. "Hush," said Florence. "Have you seen that awful bridge?" said the train. And they were forced to admit that they hadn't seen any bridges just lately. "Well, look," said the train. So they looked, and there was the bridge. "Nothing," said Dougal. "Nothing?" said the train. "Nothing," said Florence. "Afternoon all." That's all I need. A jolly laughing snail. The things I suffer. "Morning all." Make up your mind. "Evening all." "Really?" said Dougal. "Really?" And he went to investigate the bridge. Morning, said Brian. Now, don't start that again, said Dougal. The train, having had a rest, pulled herself together and prepared to carry on. You know, I've never seen this bridge before, said Florence. Well, it's just been built, said Brian. Specially. Specially for what? Said Dougal. Yes, specially for what? Said Florence. Toffee, said Brian. Toffee? Said Dougal. Toffee? Did you say toffee? Toffee, said Florence. Toffee, said the train. Yes, very runny toffee, said Brian. It got spilt, so they had to build a bridge. I wonder, mused Florence. What do you wonder? Eh? Can you drink it? Dougal was wondering that too. So Brian found some straws. Thank you, said Dougal. You're welcome, said Brian. Bliss. I hope you've left some, said Florence. For the rest of us. The train, seeing that the bridge was no longer necessary, decided to carry on the easy way. All aboard, she said. Old Man River, that old man river, he don't say nothing, but he must know something. Hello, said Florence. You took the word out of my mouth, said Dougal. What shall we do? Said Florence. What about climbing Mount Everest? Now, be sensible, Dougal, please. Well, what's wrong with climbing Mount Everest? Pray? It's been done, said Florence. Twice. By a dog? Well, I don't feel like it. Well, that's a fine attitude, I must say. Oh, come on, Dougal. Where would we be if everyone said they didn't want to climb Mount Everest? Moping about in the foothills of life. Don't go on, Dougal. I shall go on as much as I like. Oh, look. I'm not at all sure I want to, said Dougal. It's a banana, said Florence. Call me Frank, said the banana. They considered this. I think, said Dougal heavily, it's going to be one of those days. Florence met a pear. And what's all this? Said Dougal. I'm a pear, said the pear. Then why is there only one of you? Said Dougal. You know, said Florence, I've never seen talking fruit before. Not ever. You're not the only one, said Dougal. A lemon appeared. Have you seen my friends? It asked. And what's your name then? Said Dougal. Ron. Ron? Said Florence. But you can call me Mabel, said the lemon, laughing. I'm getting very confused, said Florence. You're not the only one, said Dougal. I've heard of fruit salad, but this is ridiculous. Frank. They decided to find out where all the fruit had come from, and they wondered if Dylan knew. Dylan was asleep. Does he know? Said Florence. He wouldn't know if his ears were on fire, said Dougal. What a day. They looked around for some more fruit and discovered a pineapple, doing a little dance. "If it says its name's Ada, I'll strike it," said Dougal. "How did you know?" said the pineapple. "An inspired guess," said Dougal. The pineapple laughed a lot and did another little dance and left. "She's a card, our Ada," said the banana. "You know, I don't think I can stand it," said Dougal. "Please tell me it's not happening." But it was. "An apple," said Florence. "I'm not an apple. I'm a quince." "A quince?" said Dougal. "Yes," said the quince, "but I'm in disguise." "If you'll excuse me," said Dougal, "I think I'll slip away." "Why are you shouting, Dougal?" "Because I have just slipped on a banana skin." "I wonder what happened to the banana," said Florence. "I can't bring myself to think," said Dougal. At the roundabout, Florence met Mr. Rusty, who said he had something to show her. "It's very exciting," he said. "You look." "What is it?" said Florence. "It's so exciting I can hardly contain myself," said Mr. Rusty. "Ooh, you try blowing that." So Florence blew. Zebedee arrived. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Blowing bubbles." "Blowing bubbles?" "Bubbles. Bubbles. Bubbles. Do you know, for a moment I thought you said bubbles." "I did." And Mr. Rusty confirmed that they were, in fact, blowing bubbles. "Do you want to try?" asked Florence. "Well, I think I'd better," said Zebedee. So he did. "Ah! You can take it if you want to," said Mr. Rusty. "Thank you," said Florence. "I can think of someone who'd love it," said Zebedee. "Dougal," said Florence. "Of course." What was that? What was that? I hate an unexplained noise. What is going on? Bubbles. "Bubbles?" said Dougal. "Now don't start." "Don't start what?" "And explain your bubbles." "You blow in this," said Florence. "Good heavens," said Dougal, following his bubble. The train arrived while Dougal was following his bubble, and Florence could see they were on a collision course. "Look out, Dougal," she called. Too late. "Ah! Madam," said Dougal. The train got quite heated. Fancy a grown dog playing with bubbles. Really? Huh. It'll be Dolly's next. Toot, toot. "I hope you get your lines crossed," shouted Dougal. Ermintrude came along. "Oh, I don't believe it. Bubbles in the sky. I haven't blown a bubble for years. Oh, you'll think me an old softy, but could I have a try?" And she sat down, quite overcome with the prospect of blowing bubbles. "I've run out of bubbles," said Florence. "Oh dear," said Ermintrude. "What a pity. Just when I'd got all excited. Can't we find some?" "A cow blowing bubbles, they'll never believe it." The train came back. and Zebedee arrived. They told him the bubble blowing was over because all the bubbles were lost. "Oh, well, I think I can do something about that," he said. But he somehow got it a bit wrong. "I'm forever blowing, but whoops!" Florence was in the garden, wondering where everyone was. Where can they all be? She wondered. "I expect you're wondering where everyone is," said Brian. "So I shall, without any ado, tell you. Your shaggy friend has a musical problem, and he requires help." It was true. Dougal was trying to load his piano onto the train. "Haven't you got any bigger trucks? This one wouldn't hold a thin mouse." "Really?" "Piano?" thought Florence. "If he doesn't hurry up, I shall scream," muttered the train. "Shh." "What are you doing, Dougal?" "I'm fishing off the end of Brighton Pier," said Dougal. "I don't believe he's fishing at all," said Brian. "I think he's being sarcastic. That's what I think." And Florence agreed. "Dr. Beeching, where are you?" said the train. "I beg your pardon," said Florence. "Nothing," said the train. "It's just that I would like to remind you that I am a passenger train, and I'm not used to carrying freight. Also, I should have been in crew last Thursday." "Crew?" "For the steam train reunion. All the girls are going." Dougal tried to get the rest of his things in, without much success. "Have you tried British road services?" said the train. "I don't care for your attitude," said Dougal. "And I don't care for your piano," said the train. "I'll never get to Edinburgh at this rate," said Dougal. "Edinburgh?" said Brian. "Edinburgh?" said Florence. "Yes," said Dougal. "For the festival." "Festival?" said Florence. "Well, they couldn't get Liberace." "What's all this then?" thought Brian. And Florence said she'd help if Dougal promised to keep calm. "I am calm," said Dougal. "You don't look very calm," said Brian. "He's about as calm as an elephant stampede," said the train. "Now, as I see it," said Florence very calmly, "we've got to get that piano onto that train." "Well, I'm glad we've established that," said the train. "I was beginning to get worried." They pushed. "Oh, I've done it. I've done it." "No, not quite," said Florence. So they pushed some more. The relief. "All done," said Florence. "Anything not in will be left behind," said the train. "If I'm any later, I'll be exposed to comment at Watford Junction." "Hey, what about your whatnot?" said Brian. "Whatnots I will not carry," said the train. "Away you go then," said Florence. The train sighed. "The Flying Scot would never have stood for this," she said. "Hey-ho!" Florence met Mr. Rusty. "Oh, you've brought me some flowers," he said. "How very touching." "Oh, I'm sorry," said Florence. "They're for someone else." "I knew they were," said Mr. Rusty. I was only joking. Who are they for, then? Hey? Dylan, said Florence. Flowers for Dylan, said Zebedee. He needs flowers. He's invited me to a party, said Florence. Dougal was invited too. I wonder what's cooking, he said. Not carrots, I hope. Greetings, guests, said Dylan. What's cooking? Said Florence. It's a surprise, ma'am, said Dylan. I hope you're going to like it. For you, said Florence. Why, ma'am, you shouldn't have bothered. I didn't bother, said Dougal. It's the thought, Dougal. Yes, well, I thought I wouldn't bother. I'm here, said Brian. Oh, bully, said Dougal. Ermintrude. Here, dear heart. Hello. Oh, I am looking forward to this. I'm so hungry. Careful. She'll eat it all, hissed Dougal. Do I hear a little doggy voice? Where are you, dear boy? Show yourself. Yes, said Dougal. You're frightened I'm going to eat too much, aren't you? Silly Billy. I'm a very small eater. Dylan said everything was ready. I hope you like it, he said. I wonder what it is, said Florence. Ready? Said Brian. Surely, said Dylan. Goody, said Brian. Dylan, very modestly, hoped they weren't expecting anything too grand. Is this place in the Good Food Guide? Said Dougal. Ermintrude asked Brian if he'd take her in to dinner. I'd be delighted, said Brian. Help yourselves, said Dylan. Isn't he sweet? Dougal inspected everything very carefully. I wonder if there's afters, said Ermintrude. I love afters. I wonder if there's afters, said Florence. I love afters. Sit down. Really, Dougal? Just an appetizer, said Dougal. Ready, men? I hope it's carrots, said Brian. Do you? Said Ermintrude. But it wasn't carrots. It was spaghetti. Florence tried some. Delicious, she said. Excuse me, said Ermintrude. Good, said Dylan. Very good, said Florence. Really, said Dougal. Any more? Said Brian. Well, I can spare a little, said Ermintrude. Ah, it brings tears to my eyes, said Zebedee. Everyone enjoying themselves? Yes, thank you very much, they said. Zebedee was very pleased, and he twirled with pleasure, so much that he exhausted himself. Oh, phew. Florence thanked Mr. Rusty. I see you've got your friends with you, said Zebedee. Yes, said Florence. Well, does everyone want to go to the garden? Said Zebedee. And they all said they did. Nothing would give them greater pleasure, they said. Well, I don't want to worry you, said Zebedee. which of course immediately made them very worried indeed. "But I think it's going to pour with rain," said Zebedee. "I get a funny feeling in my spring when the glass is falling, and from the feeling now, I think we're in for a deluge." Après moi, of course. Mr. Rusty said he had the answer to the problem. "Isn't he clever?" murmured the girls. Mr. Rusty's answer to the possible rain was umbrellas. He gave one to each of them, and a spare one to Florence. "Just in case," he said. "Just in case." "How wise," said Zebedee, and they went. Not raining yet. Not raining yet. I wonder if Dougal knows it's going to rain. Dougal knew. "Hello, Dougal. I see you've heard the news," said Dougal. "What news?" said Florence. "About the floods and typhoons," said Dougal. "Bert Ford assures me they're coming, and I always believe what Bert says." "Floods and typhoons?" "And monsoons and hurricanes," said Dougal. "I've never seen Graham Parker look so happy." "It isn't even raining yet," they said. "You wait," said Dougal. "This is going to make the great flood look like a puddle." A puddle. This got the others very worried indeed. "I hope I haven't worried you," said Dougal. But they said they had their umbrellas, and they weren't worried at all. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. They had their umbrellas, they said. "I suppose no one thought of bringing a spare one," said Dougal, "for any lovely friend you happened to meet?" And they said they did happen to have a spare one, which with a few modifications would probably do for Dougal. Only just covers me barnet," said Dougal. "But I suppose I can't be choosy." "No, you can't," they said. Brian arrived. "Afternoon, all. Lovely day." "Lovely day?" said Dougal. "With the snow up to your eyebrows and the rain filling your wellies?" "What rain?" said Brian. "Got a touch of sunstroke, have we? Hey?" "Oh, I like your hat. Suits you." "Cats," said Dougal unexpectedly. "I have been giving a lot of thought recently to the subject of cats. Now, it's always been a mystery to me why people keep cats when they could have a dog." "Oh, Dougal," said Florence. "People like cats because they're "Yes," said Dougal. "Well, they're pretty." "Pretty is as pretty does," said Dougal. "I'm pretty, but I don't go around chasing mice and spending half my time up trees, do I?" "But you can't climb trees, Dougal." "How do you know?" said Dougal. "Well, I just know," said Florence. "Well, you're wrong, smarty boots," said Dougal. "Do I hear the sounds of an argument?" said Ermintrude. "I just happened to be passing, and I heard words. I hope no one's being catty." "Funny you should say that," said Dougal. "Very funny," said Florence. Brian arrived. "Hello, dear thing. What do you think of cats?" said Dougal. "Oh, I think they're jolly little creatures," said Ermintrude. "And they drink milk, so they must have a lot of common sense." "I like cats," said Brian. "You like anything," said Dougal. What's all this interest in cats suddenly? Said Ermintrude. They climb trees. Well, who doesn't? Said Ermintrude. Yes, who? Said Brian. I don't know, said Florence. So they all went to see how good everyone was at climbing trees. What I like about this place, said Ermintrude, is that there's never a dull moment. Well, I'm not too sure about this tree-climbing business, said Florence. Why, dear, said Ermintrude, if it keeps them out of trouble. What trouble? Said Florence. I don't know, dear heart. Just something my old mother used to say. Dougal was trying out his cat-like qualities. Nothing to it, he said. I don't know what all the fuss is about. Well, you're the only one making any fuss, said Ermintrude, up a little tree. As you so rightly said, there's nothing to it. Is there? Come with me, said Dougal, grimly. What's going on? Said Brian. They're pretending to be cats, said Florence. Cats, ma'am? Said Dylan. Did I hear like, cats? Cats, said Florence. I don't know, ma'am, said Dylan. Whenever I hear the word cats, I feel like, sleepy. Come on, sighed Florence. Dougal and Ermintrude were having a tree-climbing contest. I think I win by a short leaf, dear heart, said Ermintrude. What a lovely view. I think I can see the sea. I don't know, birds must have a lot of fun. Are you all right there? Do I detect a wobble? No, you do not detect a wobble. I am perfectly stable. I just feel a bit sick, that's all. How are you going to get down? Said Florence. We'll wait for autumn. The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled. Soppy thing. What did you say? Said Florence. Oh, nothing, said Mr. Rusty. Guess what I've got here, said Florence. Give up, said Florence. Yes, I'll give up, said Mr. Rusty. It's a pie. Pie, said Zebedee. I made it myself, said Florence. It just needs cooking. Well, you'd better go and cook it then, said Zebedee. Maison Dougal at your service, said Dougal. What's your pleasure? I want to cook my pie, said Florence, in your stove. Pie, said Dougal. Pie, said Florence. That's a pie, said Dougal. Looks more like a tart to me. I don't know what you mean, said Florence. Well, why do you want to use my stove? Said Dougal. It's pretty, said Florence. How feminine, murmured Mr. Rusty. What sort of pie? Said Dougal. Not sure, said Florence. You're not sure? Said Dougal. You come in here, shove a pie in me oven, and then say you're not sure? What would Fanny say? Fanny who? Said Florence. I may faint. Now don't fuss, Dougal. That's very wise, said Mr. Rusty. My old granny used to say pies should never be fussed. Quite right, said Florence. So they left the pie to cook and went for a walk, which was a mistake. Oh, what does my little nose detect? A pie? Oh, doing a lot of bubbling. I better make sure it doesn't take off. And Brian put a stone on the pie to hold it down. Dylan also noticed something. What's that like, rare smell? He said. Am I dreaming? No? I think I'd better, investigate this. He went to the stove. That pie looks ready to, eat. Dylan had a fight with his conscience, and his conscience finally won. Ermintrude came along. What's this then? A pie? What's more, An unattended pie? People are very careless. Someone could quite easily eat that. Just as well I'm so honest. But what if it doesn't belong to anyone? Be a pity to waste it. I'll just add my secret ingredient and come back and eat that later. Dougal, too, was thinking about the pie, so he just added a little something for luck. Zebedee wondered where everyone was. What's cooking, he thought. They all came back in the direction of the pie. Gracious, said Florence. I'm very disappointed, said Ermintrude. It's not every day you find a pie and then discover it belongs to someone else. And I added my secret ingredient, too. Bear up, said Brian. Florence gave what she thought was a piece of the pie to Dougal. It was Brian's stone. My mum's pastry was tough, but this is ridiculous. The pie didn't seem to be a great success. Tough. Like yours, said Brian. Watch it, said Dougal. I think we've had a failure, said Mr. Rusty. And they were all forced to agree. Well, you can't win 'em all, said Zebedee. Time for bed. What shall we do today? Said Florence. Well, I've had a thought, said Zebedee. Tell me, said Florence. I want a photograph, said Zebedee. What of? Said Florence, or rather, who of? Everyone, said Zebedee. I want it for my album, just in case. In case of what? But Zebedee didn't answer. Zebedee wants a photograph. Of me, said Dougal. Of everyone, said Florence. Oddly enough, Dougal had his camera with him. Why, Dougal, you've got your camera with you, said Florence. Hello, 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 said Brian. Hey, hold it right there, Snail. I have a little job for you. Oh, ecstasy, oh, bliss. We'll have less of the heavy sarcasm and more attention to what I say, said Dougal. Please. Florence told Mr. Rusty about the photograph, and Mr. Rusty said he thought it was a good idea. Just in case. Dylan wondered where everyone was. It was so peaceful. Not for long, said Ermintrude. Meanwhile, back at the camera, Florence and Mr. Rusty were also wondering where everyone was. So they went to look. Well, I'm here, said Dougal. Yes, but you're not exactly everyone, are you? Said Mr. Rusty. And Zebedee wanted everyone. In case. In case of what? Said Dougal. Is he worried he's not going to see us again? Or something? I don't know, said Florence. Well, I think it's very sinister, said Dougal. I'm all ready, said Brian. But Mr. Rusty said they should try to get everyone. Zebedee wanted a photograph of everyone. I wonder why, said Florence, worried. Well, perhaps they're writing him out of the series, said Dougal. Like they do, if you're not careful. I've been ready for hours, said Brian. We'll take one, said Mr. Rusty, just in case. So get snapping, mollusk. And mind you get me right profile. The others are here, said Florence. Where have you been? Said Dougal. We've been waiting for days. All right, then. Everyone in position, please. Positions, said Brian. Where's the birdie, Dougal? Where's the what? Said Dougal. No good without the birdie. I don't believe it, said Dougal. Whatever next? Wait till I tell Tony. Birdies indeed. Watch the birdie? What? Said Dougal. What did you say? What? 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 There's no need to snap. I only said, watch the birdie. Got to have a birdie, said Mr. Rusty. No good without a birdie. No good at all. It's a well-known fact. And it's also a well-known fact, said Dougal, that if we don't take this picture soon, we'll be part of the news headlines. Oh, I'm sure they'll wait for us, Dougal, said Florence. I'll be a birdie, said Brian. But there was no need for this sacrifice. Watch me, said the birdie. Oh, it's flown away, said Mr. Rusty. Now there won't be any photograph, and posterity will forget we ever existed. Sic trans...